Stress is like salt and pepper. A life without it lacks flavor, but too much ruins the dish. Now, that is a pretty surprising metaphor, right? I mean, we're so conditioned to view stress as this ultimate bad guy, this toxic force we just have to completely eradicate from our lives. But honestly, a life completely devoid of stress would actually be, well, completely devoid of motivation. Just a tiny pinch of it is exactly what gets us out of bed, pushes us to hit those crazy deadlines, and drives us to actually achieve our goals. It's literally only when we pour way too much salt into the recipe that the whole dish becomes inedible. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to completely demystify a universal psychological experience that affects every single one of us. We're unpacking the true anatomy of stress. We'll look at why some of us are just naturally more prone to it, where it actually comes from in the first place, and, crucially, how we can measure and moderate it. All right, let's jump right in. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with Chapter 1, The True Nature of Stress. Then, recognizing the symptoms. Chapter 3 explores where does stress come from. Chapter 4 asks, are you prone to stress? And we'll wrap up with measuring and moderating stress. Chapter 1, The True Nature of Stress and Redefining the Experience. To really understand what we're dealing with here, we actually have to look way back at the Latin root of the word, which is stringere. It literally means to draw tight. You can almost feel that physical sensation, right? That sudden tightening in your chest or your jaw when you get overwhelmed. For the longest time, early scientists viewed stress purely as this external force, basically something that just happens to you. But modern psychology totally flips that script. Just look at this definition from researchers Lazarus and Fultman. They define stress as a particular relationship between the person and the environment that is appraised by the person as taxing or exceeding their resources. That word, appraised, is absolutely the secret to everything we're talking about today. It means stress isn't just the flat tire on your commute or that massive looming deadline. It is your mind's interpretation of that event. It's that split-second moment you look at a problem and your brain decides, nope, I do not have the tools to handle this. Building on that, there's actually a stark contrast between two very distinct types of stress. First up, we have eustress. Believe it or not, this is actually good stress. It's that positive, exciting response you get to a desired stressor. Think about planning a wedding or starting an awesome new job. But there is a tipping point. Take a case study from our source material about a guy named Nirav. He was an incredibly bright MBA student who landed this fantastic job as a manager at a top multinational company. Initially, he was thrilled. It was pure eustress. But as the immense daily pressure of the role built up, he just wasn't able to cope. His eustress completely tipped over into distress. He became irritable, secluded, stopped eating, and his performance plummeted. You see, distress happens when that arousal becomes way too intense or prolonged, shifting from a really helpful motivator into a deeply harmful burden. Moving on to Chapter 2, Recognizing the Symptoms. Focusing on the mind and body connection. When our internal appraisal tells us we're out of our depth, our body and mind immediately start sounding the alarm bells. And stress manifests across four main categories. Physically, we see things like a rapid pulse, dry mouth, or muscle tension. Psychologically, it pops up as racing thoughts and incredibly poor judgment. Emotionally, it brings on anxiety and anger. And behaviorally, it can lead to nervous mannerisms or even substance abuse. But what's absolutely crucial to grasp here is how fluid these categories actually are. Consider another case from our text, Samina. She suffered a devastating emotional tragedy, losing her mother and having to abandon her studies just to care for her siblings. But her profound emotional stress manifested as a purely physical illness. Her doctors could find absolutely zero physiological reason for her sickness. Basically, her mind was drawing tight, and her body took the physical blow. Chapter 3. Where does stress come from? Let's look at internal and external sources. Now that we know how to spot the symptoms, we've got to uncover the actual root causes of our daily anxieties. Psychologists generally categorize these sources into three main buckets. Let's start with the first one, frustration. This occurs quite simply when your goal-oriented behavior is thwarted by an obstacle. You want to get from point A to point B, and bam, a giant wall drops right in front of you. The text shares the story of Ravi. He was a highly dedicated employee who worked incredibly hard, fully expecting a promotion. When the promotions were announced, Ravi's name just wasn't on the list. That sudden wall, that completely thwarted goal, triggered deep frustration. It destroyed his motivation, spilled over into fights with his spouse, and eventually led to a severe psychological breakdown. The roadblock wasn't just a minor career hiccup. It became a massive, overwhelming source of distress. The second source is conflict of motives. This involves those exhausting mental gymnastics of decision-making that drain us on a daily basis. Because sometimes stress isn't a roadblock, it's a crossroads. Approach is when you have to choose between two awesome options, like deciding between two amazing job offers. Not too bad, right? But then there's avoidance, the classic rock in a hard place, like choosing between staying unemployed or taking a job you absolutely hate. Approach avoidance involves a single goal that has both big pros and big cons. Think about getting a dream job overseas but having to leave all your family behind to take it. And finally, multiple approach avoidance is the really complex mix of all the above, which, let's be honest, is what most of our major life decisions tend to be. The sheer mental friction of just having to choose is a massive stress generator all on its own. Finally, in our third bucket, we have pressures. Now, these can be external, like the heavy social expectations of your family, massive work overload, or even environmental factors, like living in a super noisy, crowded city. Then there are the significant life events, both good and bad, like getting married, going through a divorce, or moving houses. But we also face intense internal pressures. These are the demands we constantly place on ourselves to maintain our self-image. It's that nagging voice in our head telling us how we should be acting or what we ought to achieve by a certain age. When these internal and external demands start piling up, they create this constant, simmering baseline of everyday stress. Chapter 4, Are you prone to stress? It's time to talk about the personality factor. Have you ever wondered why two people can be in the exact same high-pressure environment, yet one person completely thrives while the other just crumbles? Well, the answer often lies in our personality. Take the classic comparison between type A and type B personalities. Type B individuals are generally more relaxed. They just naturally have a lower stress reactivity. But type A individuals, they are uniquely susceptible to distress. They are constantly hurried, highly competitive, and often suffer from status insecurity, meaning they are constantly comparing themselves to others just to try and boost their own self-esteem. They also engage in something called polyphasic thinking. That's a very fancy academic way of saying they are completely obsessed with doing multiple things at exactly the same time. This constant time urgency and literal inability to switch off basically becomes a drive towards self-destruction, making their bodies incredibly prone to stress-related illnesses. Embedded within certain stress-prone personalities is a highly destructive trait called hostility. Now, when we hear the word hostility, we usually think of physical violence. But the crucial point here is that psychological hostility is very different. It is basically a baseline cynicism towards other people's motives. It's the individual who gets furiously, intensely stressed over a spilled cup of tea, or absolutely explodes internally just because someone left unfolded laundry on a chair. It is this constant tendency to blame others, and this recurring, simmering arousal of anger absolutely wrecks their physical health and social relationships over time. Another massive factor in stress proneness is an incredible concept coined by psychologist Martin Seligman, learned helplessness, sometimes called learned pessimism. This happens when someone has been frequently faced with uncontrollable negative events, and they just give up. When something bad happens, they view it through a highly specific, pessimistic lens. They see the negative event as entirely permanent and deeply personal. They think, this is entirely my fault and it is literally never going to get better. As you can imagine, viewing the entire world through this kind of lens guarantees that even a minor challenge will cause a major, devastating spike in stress. Let's move to two traits that almost always go hand in hand: perfectionism and procrastination. Internal perfectionism creates these impossible, completely unyielding expectations for yourself. And because those standards are so impossibly high, they generate intense fear. Fear of failure, or even just fear of the sheer amount of effort required. This fear leads straight to procrastination. You completely avoid the task, which then generates intense guilt, which inevitably leads to external repercussions like missed deadlines, which, you guessed it, just dumps pure fuel right back onto your stress engine. It is a vicious, completely self-perpetuating cycle. Chapter 5: Measuring and Moderating Stress. Let's talk about taking back control. So how does science actually measure this invisible force? And more importantly, how can we take back control of our well-being? Well, to treat stress, we first have to measure it. Scientists have quite a few tools for this. They can use physiological measures like polygraphs to track heart rate or blood tests to look for stress hormones like cortisol. They also use psychological tests, self-report inventories, major life event checklists, and really in-depth interviews. But guys, here is the great irony of stress measurement. Hooking someone up to a cold, intimidating polygraph machine or sticking them with a needle to draw blood can actually trigger the exact stress response the scientists are trying to measure in the first place. Because of this, subjective psychological tests are often heavily favored simply because they give the individual a voice to explain their own internal appraisal of the situation. Fortunately, we don't just have factors that make us prone to stress. We actually have powerful moderators that protect us. Things like optimism and resilience act as incredible shields, helping individuals bounce back from the brink of burnout without suffering psychophysiological disorders. Furthermore, our gender and our culture play massive roles. The way we are socialized, the strong community support systems we have in our culture, and the deeply held beliefs we have all act as a crucial buffer. They actively alter how we perceive threats and provide us with incredibly diverse coping mechanisms. Which brings us right back to where we started. The next time you feel that familiar tightening in your chest, I really want you to remember Lazarus and Folkman. Take a breath and ask yourself, are you reacting to the stressor itself, or are you just reacting to your perception of it? Remember, stress isn't just the world's pressing down on you. It is entirely about how you appraise your own strength to push back. At the end of the day, you get to decide how much salt and pepper goes into your dish. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this newfound understanding helps you take back control of your day.